It was around midnight, and I was lying in bed, waiting. The lights were off, and the room was dark, but my mind was anything but quiet. This was the third night in a row that Emma hadn't come home at a reasonable hour. She said it was work, said she was drowning in deadlines and late-night meetings. But work had never kept her out until nearly dawn before. And the woman I married, the one I thought I knew, had never hidden her phone like it was some national secret. Just as I was debating whether to call her, I heard the unmistakable sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The headlights cut through the blinds, casting a sharp line across the room, and my jaw tightened. I took a slow breath, getting out of bed and heading for the hallway. I'd decided tonight was the night I'd confront her. She slipped in quietly, probably assuming I'd be asleep. I stood there in the shadows, watching her as she shut the door and leaned against it with a soft sigh. There was a hint of a smile on her face, and her cheeks were flushed. She looked like a teenager sneaking in after curfew. I felt a cold anger building in my chest. I'd been waiting up, thinking I'd see a tired, overworked wife, but what I got was something else entirely. "Nice night?" I asked, my voice low and calm, but she jumped as though I'd screamed. Her head snapped up, eyes wide as she registered me standing there. "Alex," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. I didn't realize you were still up." "Clearly," I replied, stepping closer until I could see every detail on her face. "Late again. Work must be intense lately." She managed a weak smile. "Yeah, just busy, you know. Lots of last-minute deadlines. I didn't want to wake you, so I thought I'd come in quietly." Her eyes flicked away from mine, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Emma, do you take me for a fool?" I asked, my voice growing harder. "What kind of work are you doing at this hour? And why do you smell like some damn cologne I don't recognize?" The flush on her cheeks deepened, and she dropped her gaze, wringing her hands nervously. "Alex, please, let's not do this right now. It's late and I'm tired." I stepped back, letting out a short, humorless laugh. "You're tired?" My fists clenched, and I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Emma, I know you're hiding something, and I know damn well it isn't work keeping you out this late." She shifted uncomfortably, but that same guilty smile crept back onto her face. "You're imagining things," she said, her tone breezy, as though she could laugh it off. I watched her for a moment, her face now full of that defiant smirk, and I knew I needed proof. My word against hers would lead nowhere. So I took a step back, a plan already forming in my mind. "All right, Emma," I said, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am overthinking this." I paused, watching as she let out a relieved breath, already brushing past me on her way to the bedroom. But I wasn't done. I watched her walk down the hall, that smug look still on her face. Tomorrow, I'd make sure she regretted every single lie she'd told me. The next morning, after she left for work, I started digging. Her phone was the obvious place to start, but she'd become too cautious. No, I needed something subtler. I spent the day going through the house, looking for anything. Receipts, notes, emails, that might lead me to what I already knew was the truth. Finally, I found a small, crumpled receipt in her car, wedged between the seat and the console. It was from a bar across town, dated the previous night, with a room charge attached. A hotel room. My chest tightened, fury and betrayal mixing into a potent rage. I didn't just want answers anymore. I wanted to make her pay. That night, I followed her. I watched as she pulled into that same bar, dressed in clothes she never wore around me. She looked younger, more carefree, even daring. And then, as she disappeared inside, I waited. After a while, a boy, barely out of college, maybe 20 at most, joined her. They laughed, talked close, as though they were some high school couple sneaking around. My stomach churned with disgust. It wasn't just an affair. She was chasing boys, kids, indulging in something I could hardly believe I was seeing. Watching Emma with that kid was like a slap in the face, each laugh and flirtatious glance cutting me deeper than I thought possible. I stayed hidden in my car, just across the lot, feeling my pulse hammer in my temples as I watched them disappear through the hotel entrance. My mind raced, each thought darker than the last. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd humiliated me, sneaking around with some kid who probably still lived with his parents. I waited, my fists clenched tightly around the steering wheel, replaying every lie she'd fed me over the past few months. This wasn't some momentary lapse or a single mistake. No, this was deliberate. She'd chosen this life, chosen her selfish desires over our family, over the life we'd built together. And tonight, I decided I'd make sure she regretted every single choice she'd made. I gave it an hour, letting her think she'd gotten away with it yet again. The waiting was brutal, but my plan was already beginning to take shape. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. I wanted to tear down every facade she'd built, to expose the truth in a way she couldn't deny. If she wanted to throw away her life for some cheap thrill, then I'd make sure everyone saw her for exactly who she was. When they finally re-emerged, I snapped a few photos from a distance. They were smiling, hands brushing as they walked. She looked at him like he was her entire world. It was a look I hadn't seen her give me in years. My stomach twisted with revulsion, but I kept my focus. Every picture was more proof, a weapon I'd use to dismantle whatever story she tried to spin. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, what was coming her way. The following day, I put everything in motion. I started by collecting every piece of evidence I had. The photos, the receipt, even the credit card statement showing charges she couldn't explain away. I contacted a lawyer I knew through a friend, someone known for their ruthless approach to infidelity cases. I wanted to make sure that when this was over, she'd be left with nothing but her regrets. That evening, she came home again late, this time practically skipping through the door. She seemed more confident, as if she'd found a new thrill to replace the life she'd shared with me. But the moment she saw me standing in the kitchen, her smile faltered. Maybe she could sense it, the anger, the betrayal, the plan I had ready to spring on her. "Hey," she said, her voice overly casual as she tossed her bag on the counter. "Long day for both of us, huh?" I smiled, forcing myself to play along. "Yeah, I bet it was." I glanced at her bag, catching a whiff of perfume, a scent that wasn't hers. Her face flushed slightly, and she turned away, pretending to check her phone. "You're working late a lot these days, Emma," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "It must be exhausting." She gave a nervous laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, you know how it is. Deadlines. Clients breathing down my neck. Just part of the job, right?" I replied, holding her gaze a little too long. "Part of the job?" She shifted, her smile now forced. "What's with the third degree, Alex? I told you, it's just work." "Of course." I took a step closer, watching her carefully. "But if it's really just work, then you wouldn't mind if I shared something I found with a few people from your office, right?" Her expression froze, and I could see her start to panic. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, just a couple of photos I took last night," I said, keeping my tone casual, like I was discussing the weather. "From the bar across town. You know, where you were getting cozy with your client." The color drained from her face, and she took a step back, stumbling slightly. "Alex, it's not what you think," she stammered, her voice shaking. I smirked, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like, Emma. And here's the best part. I've got everything I need to make sure the world knows about it." She took a shaky breath, her eyes darting to the door as if considering an escape. But she knew she was trapped. I watched her carefully, the fear growing in her eyes, and it felt like a twisted kind of justice. For once, she was the one scrambling for a way out. Emma's eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for some kind of excuse, a way to twist her way out of this. But she knew as well as I did that her usual tricks would not save her now. I held her gaze, letting her see just how far I was willing to go. "Alex, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. I got carried away, but it doesn't mean anything. You have to understand, it was just a distraction. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" I repeated, my voice cold and mocking. "Funny, you looked pretty serious last night, Emma. From where I was sitting, it seemed like you'd forgotten about me. The kids, our life, everything. So don't stand here and tell me it was nothing." Her face twisted, and she let out a short, desperate laugh. Alex, please. I messed up. Okay? But we can fix this. Let's talk about it. Figure out a way to move forward. For the kids' sake. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. For the kids' sake? Now you want to think about them? Where was that concern when you were sneaking around, lying, betraying every promise we made? Tears sprang to her eyes, and she took a shaky step toward me, reaching out a hand. I know I hurt you. I know I made a terrible mistake. But we have years together, Alex. You can't just throw that away. We can fix this if you just give me a chance. I stepped back, folding my arms, watching as the facade of her confidence crumbled bit by bit. Emma, I've already made my decision. There's nothing left to fix. You've thrown away every ounce of trust one had in you, and now you'll live with the consequences. The panic deepened in her eyes, and she shook her head, almost pleading. What do you mean by that? Alex, please, don't do anything drastic. Drastic? I raised an eyebrow. Drastic would be packing up your things and throwing you out tonight. But no, I'm not going to make it that easy for you, Emma. I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything, bit by bit, starting with your little toy from last night. The shock on her face was almost satisfying. I leaned in, my voice low, filled with an anger I hadn't realized I was still holding. If you think you can keep seeing him, you're wrong. I've already done a little digging, and it turns out your boy's got some things to lose too. I'm sure he wouldn't want his friends or family finding out about his little affair with a married woman twice his age. She gasped, the color draining from her face as she took in my words. Alex, please, she choked, her voice thick with desperation. You don't have to do this. Let's handle this like adults, for the sake of the life we built together. Don't ruin us both. You ruined us the minute you chose him over me, I replied, my voice cold. You brought this on yourself, and now you'll face the fallout. No more hiding, no more lying. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. She backed away, her face a mix of horror and disbelief. I could see her mind racing, trying to think of something, anything, to turn the situation around. But there was nothing left to say, no way to undo what she'd already done. I'll start with your boss, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I'm sure he'd love to know how you spend those late nights. And then I'll move on to your parents, our friends, and of course, your little boyfriend. I'll make sure he knows just how disposable he is to you. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg, but I cut her off with a glare. Save it, Emma. You're the one who wanted this, so enjoy it while it lasts. By the time I'm finished, you'll be left with nothing but your mistakes. I turned on my heel, heading toward the door, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. The next morning, I wasted no time. I contacted Emma's boss directly, attaching a selection of photos, proof of her late-night work escapades. I kept the message short, professional, and cold, explaining that her actions were deeply unprofessional and reflected poorly on the company. I knew the company's image was everything to her boss, and I counted on him wanting to distance himself from the scandal. Emma's career had been her life. More important than family, more important than anything. Losing that would be a blow she wouldn't see coming. When I got home that evening, I could tell the news had already reached her. She sat on the couch, her head in her hands, looking shattered. The confident, smug woman from before was gone, replaced by someone who was now realizing just how vulnerable she was. What did you do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see her hands trembling, her face pale. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What I said I would do, Emma. This is what happens when you tear apart someone's life just because you got bored. You think you can play games with people and never face the consequences? I'm making sure you feel every one of them. Alex, please, she began, her voice breaking. You don't understand. I need that job. I worked so hard for it. You know that. Please don't take everything from me. I stared at her, the emptiness in her plea almost laughable. I don't have to take anything from you, Emma. You did this to yourself. Maybe if you had valued what you had, this wouldn't be happening. Her desperation grew, her eyes pleading, like she could somehow convince me to turn back. I'll change, Alex. I'll do anything you want. Just please don't ruin my life. Think about the kids. They'll be hurt too if this goes too far. The kids? I said, my voice thick with bitterness. Funny how you didn't think of them when you decided to wreck our marriage. No, Emma, you don't get to play the family card now. You threw away the right to ask me for mercy. She stood, taking a step toward me, her eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen before. Alex, please, there has to be some way we can move past this. I'll give up everything. I'll quit my job if you want. Just don't make this public. I smiled, cold and unfeeling. It's a little late for that, isn't it? By now, I'm sure your coworkers know exactly what kind of person you are. And I'm just getting started. The shock in her eyes was almost satisfying. I could tell she hadn't truly believed I would go through with it, that I'd have the resolve to follow through. I watched as the reality sank in, and it was clear she was running out of ideas, running out of excuses, and she knew it. Fine, she said, her voice barely a whisper. If you're set on revenge, then go ahead. But don't think this will make you feel any better. Ruining my life won't change what happened. Maybe, I replied, my voice low and controlled. But it will make sure you remember this moment. And every time you try to move on, every time you try to rebuild, you'll remember the cost of what you did. I turned to leave, but paused, looking back at her one last time. And don't think you can escape this by moving on to someone else. Because if I find out you've continued with him or any other kid you think you can manipulate, I'll be right there, ready to make sure you don't get a fresh start. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes brimming with tears. She was out of defenses, out of manipulations. She had finally realized that she'd lost. I left her standing there in the empty room, knowing that every time she looked at herself, she'd see the truth of what she'd done and the life she'd destroyed. For the first time in months, I felt a twisted sense of peace, knowing that my life could finally begin again without her lies twisting every part of it. The next few days were almost too quiet. Emma kept to herself, barely leaving the bedroom, and when she did, she avoided my eyes, her face pale and hollow. The house felt empty, but I welcomed the silence. It was as though every deceitful word she'd said, every fake smile she'd forced, had drained from the walls, leaving a kind of peace in their place. But I wasn't finished yet. She still hadn't faced the full reality of her actions, and I wanted to make sure she understood what she'd done on every level. I had one more card to play, a final move to ensure there was no escape from the mess she'd created. The next morning, I sent an email to her parents with a short, simple message. I'm sorry to inform you that Emma and I are separating. I've discovered that she's been involved in a months-long affair. I believe you deserve to know the truth, and I hope you'll keep the kids' well-being as your priority during this time. Alex. I included a few photos, the undeniable proof of what she'd been doing, and hit send. Emma's parents had always supported her, always believed in her, and I could imagine the disappointment, the shock they'd feel upon seeing those images. Maybe they would call her, ask her why, demand answers. But whatever happened, they would know. She'd have no choice but to face the truth with them, too. That afternoon, Emma's phone rang. I watched her answer it in the hallway, her face going pale as she recognized her mother's voice. Her expression twisted as she tried to explain, to justify, to make them understand. But whatever they were saying on the other end was hitting her hard. She closed her eyes, her voice dropping to a whisper as she struggled through the call. When she finally hung up, she looked like a shadow of the woman she'd once been. I could tell she wanted to lash out, to throw blame, but she knew better by now. Every attempt at self-defense had been met with a colder, harsher truth, and I had no sympathy left to offer her. Instead, I just watched her, unflinching, as she realized she had nothing left. By the end of the week, Emma's world had shattered completely. She lost her job, her family knew the truth, and even her friends, those who still reached out to her, had seen the cracks. She was trapped. Every escape route she tried to keep hidden now closed off, each bridge burned. Alex, she finally said one evening, her voice barely a whisper. I'm leaving. I don't think there's any way I can stay here. I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Good, I replied. You've done enough damage here. It's time for you to move on. She looked at me, her face lined with regret, the weight of her actions bearing down on her. I'm sorry, she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. I never meant for any of this. I don't know why I did it, why I threw everything away, but I felt nothing in response. No anger, no pain, just a quiet satisfaction. That's your problem to figure out, Emma. And I hope you do, for your sake. But I'm done with all of this. The next morning, she packed her things and left. I stood at the window, watching her walk down the driveway, knowing that this was the last time I'd see her as part of my life. The kids were with my parents for the weekend, and when they came back, I'd tell them the truth in a way they could understand. But I would make sure they knew they were loved and safe, that this was the start of a new chapter for all of us. As the door closed behind her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The house was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time, it felt like a place I could make my own. Emma was gone, but she'd given me something without realizing it. A second chance at a life without her lies. And as I sat down, thinking of all the ways I'd rebuild, I felt a fierce determination settle inside me. I would make a life for myself and my kids that was strong, whole, and free of betrayal. This time, I'd be in control of my own future and nothing would stand in my way. With Emma gone, the house felt emptier, but strangely, it was a relief. The shadows of her lies no longer clung to every corner. I began sorting through her things left behind, boxing up items to donate or throw away. There was something liberating about clearing out every reminder of the life we'd shared. Each item that disappeared felt like one less weight around my neck. I focused on creating a new life, one built on honesty and stability for myself and the kids. I spent more time with them, pouring energy into making their lives whole again. We made a tradition out of Friday fun nights, a mix of movies, board games, and pizza. The kids were slowly adjusting, finding their own balance in this new chapter. They asked questions, of course, but I kept my answers simple, focusing on reassuring them that no matter what happened, they were loved and secure. One day, as I was driving them home from school, my daughter looked up from the back seat and asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question was unexpected, and I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. "Yes," I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "I think I am. It's been hard, but things are getting better. We're getting better." She nodded thoughtfully, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Good. I like it when you smile." Hearing that was all the confirmation I needed. I realized that in all the mess and chaos, I had been given a chance to be the father my kids deserved, a present, engaged, and positive force in their lives. There was no more room for bitterness or regret. My life was moving forward, and I was determined to keep it that way. I also reconnected with old friends, something I hadn't done in years. The first time I met up with them, they were cautious, unsure if I was ready to talk about what had happened. But as the night wore on, I felt the tension leave me, replaced by laughter and a sense of belonging. I shared parts of my story, carefully, leaving out the details but explaining how I'd rebuilt. The support they offered was overwhelming, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. Not long after, I decided to make another change. I'd always dreamed of having my own business, something small but meaningful. With Emma gone, it felt like the perfect time to pursue it. I started planning, sketching out ideas late into the night after the kids were asleep. The process was exciting and filled me with a kind of drive I hadn't felt in years. The vision of a life where I was truly free, free to make my own decisions, free to create something of my own, was exhilarating. On the first official day of my new business, I took the kids with me to see the office space I'd rented, a modest spot but full of potential. They ran around the empty space, laughing, their voices filling the bare walls with energy and possibility. I felt a spark of pride, a sense that this was the beginning of something that belonged entirely to me. That night, as I put them to bed, my son looked up at me and asked, "Are you going to make something amazing, Dad?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Yes, buddy. I'm going to make something amazing. For us." The journey hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The anger, the betrayal, even the memories of Emma, had finally faded into the background. This was my life now, a life that I had built, piece by piece, from the ashes of everything that had come before. As I stood by the window, watching the stars come out, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. I had fought my way back from betrayal, from heartbreak, and I'd come out stronger. The life I was creating was my own, full of new dreams, new memories, and a future that, for the first time, felt completely in my control. Months passed, and with every day, the pieces of my new life began to fall into place. My business was growing, slowly but surely, and I was finding satisfaction in the kind of work I'd only dreamed of before. I had clients who valued the honesty and effort I put into every project, and it was something I hadn't felt in a long time. A genuine pride in what I was building, both for myself and my kids. My relationship with the kids had deepened too. They were thriving, settling into our new routines, and I could see the effects of the stability I'd worked so hard to create. We'd set up our own little traditions, like homemade pizza on Fridays and weekend hikes when the weather was good. These moments, simple as they were, reminded me of what really mattered. A life built on trust, love, and the sense of belonging that we'd rebuilt together. One Saturday, while we were hiking up a nearby trail, my daughter stopped to take in the view, her face lit with excitement. "Dad, look how high up we are," she exclaimed, pointing toward the valley below. I followed her gaze, feeling a rush of pride. For all the challenges we'd been through, here we were, standing on our own, stronger than ever. "I'm proud of you guys," I said, smiling at them both. "You've been so brave, and I couldn't ask for better hiking buddies." My son grinned, puffing out his chest in pride. "We're the best, right, Dad?" I laughed, giving him a playful nudge. The absolute best. The joy I felt in these small moments was something I couldn't have predicted. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it was genuine. I no longer felt haunted by the memories of what had happened with Emma. They were there, of course, but they had lost their power over me. I'd reclaimed my peace, and nothing could take that from me. One evening, while sitting with the kids after dinner, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, glancing at the screen, and saw Emma's name flashing across it. For a brief moment, I felt the familiar tension return, the reminder of the past pressing in on me. But as I looked at her name, I realized something. I didn't feel the old anger, the bitterness. I just felt nothing. It was as though the last few months had closed a chapter that I no longer needed to revisit. I let the call go to voicemail, and a few minutes later, a message popped up. "Hey, Alex." Her voice sounded softer, more subdued than I remembered. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to reach out to apologize. I'm in a different place now, trying to work through things. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I hope you and the kids are well." I listened, feeling only a faint sense of finality. There was no rush of emotions, no desire to respond. Her apology, while probably sincere, was something I didn't need to hear anymore. I'd already moved on, and hearing her words only confirmed that I'd done the right thing by leaving her behind. The kids came in shortly after, laughing about something they'd seen on TV, and I set the phone down, focusing on them. They were my future, the life we'd built together, my purpose. The call from Emma was just another piece of the past, one that no longer had a place in our world. That night, as I put them to bed, I realized how much peace I'd found. I didn't need validation from Emma or anyone else. I'd carved out a life that was mine, shaped by my own choices and filled with the people who mattered most. And as I looked out over the quiet, peaceful home we'd created, I knew I was finally free. With the passing months, life settled into a rhythm that felt as solid and steady as the roots of a tree. My business continued to grow, and I had earned a reputation for being reliable, trustworthy, a stark contrast to what I'd left behind. I found myself surrounded by people who valued honesty and hard work, a reminder of the life I wanted to build for myself and the kids. Our weekends were sacred. On Saturdays, we would go to the farmer's market, filling a bag with fresh fruits and baked treats. The kids loved exploring, finding something new each time, and these small adventures became the foundation of our life together. I was giving them a world that was stable, and they blossomed in it, their laughter filling the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. One evening, after tucking the kids in, I sat alone in the living room, reflecting on how far we'd come. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and looked around the room, noticing the photos on the walls, the handmade crafts the kids had brought home from school. They were small, but each detail felt significant. Each item a testament to the life we were building together, free from secrets or shadows. As I took a sip, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jason, an old friend who had been checking in on me from time to time, inviting me out to a small gathering. I paused, considering. In the past, I would have hesitated, unsure if I was ready to put myself out there again. But now, I felt different. I wasn't the person I'd been months ago, broken by betrayal. I'd rebuilt, brick by brick, and felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Sure, I typed back. I'd love to come by. The following evening, I joined Jason and a few friends at a local brewery. There was music playing, people talking, laughing, and the atmosphere felt alive, filled with a kind of easy warmth I hadn't realized I missed. We caught up, talking about old memories, sharing updates on life, family, and work. For the first time, I was fully present, free from the burden of what had happened. As the evening went on, I noticed someone sitting across the room, glancing over at our table now and then. She had an easy, open smile, and her eyes lit up when she laughed. I caught her gaze, and to my surprise, she held it, smiling in a way that felt welcoming. I felt a flutter of nerves, something I hadn't experienced in years, and I realized that maybe I was ready for this. A small step, just to see what was possible. Jason noticed and nudged me, grinning. Hey, go talk to her. You've earned it. I laughed, shaking my head. Maybe I will. Taking a deep breath, I made my way over and introduced myself. Her name was Lauren, and we ended up talking about everything from favorite books to travel. It felt easy, comfortable, like meeting an old friend. There was no rush, no expectations, just the simple pleasure of connection. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, I felt open to the possibilities. When I returned home that night, the house was quiet, peaceful. I checked on the kids, watching them sleep, their faces soft and content. Standing there, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This life, this second chance, was something I'd fought hard for. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, had felt the sting of loss, but I'd come out stronger, clearer about what mattered. I turned off the lights, feeling a quiet resolve settle over me. The past was behind me, a chapter closed, and every day was a chance to create something new, something lasting. Whatever the future held, I knew I was ready. I was finally at peace, surrounded by the life I had built, and the endless possibilities stretching out before me.